Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we can just take our seats and settle down. Well, that was an interesting start. I hope you all enjoyed that start to the event. Session 2, we're going to talk about the future of brands. And kicking off this session, we're going to delve into this concept of marketing to machines, AI, and voice-controlled everything. And honestly, how can we justify future in the title without a presentation talking about AI and voice? Now, we're very fortunate to have Neeraj Dewar here, who's a professor from the Ivey Business School in Canada, to tell us why these technological changes will have a profound impact on the marketing ecosystem. Let's give Neeraj a huge hand and welcome him on stage.
Good morning, everybody. Let me start with a potentially controversial statement. If I were to say the advertising business is very stable, very staid, very steady, unchanging, in fact, over a period of 50 to 60 years, it hasn't changed all that much, you'd probably laugh me out of the room. But in one sense, that is absolutely true. At a very high level, if you look at expenditures, the amount of money we as a society spend informing and influencing consumer choices, that amount has remained between 1 and 1.5% for the last 50 or 60 years. It's never gone above 1.5%, and it's rarely declined below 1%. Other industries have seen much greater upheavals. Manufacturing, for example, has gone from 16% of the market, 16% of the economy, to about 8% of the economy. Healthcare, finance have all ballooned. Finance has gone from 2.5% of the economy to more than 8% of the economy. And if you look at healthcare, healthcare has gone from somewhere around 5% to 18%. In that sense, advertising is actually a very stable, very steady business. The business of informing and influencing consumer choices is actually very stable. The percentage that we spend on it rarely exceeds 1.5%. So now the question for you is, things are changing. There are revolutions happening in the advertising business. So one of the questions that I would have for you is, in the next 20 years, in the next 30 years, will the advertising industry look more like the manufacturing industry in decline, or will it look more like finance and healthcare? That's a question that we can perhaps begin to address once we start to understand the impact of artificial intelligence and the impact of AI on consumer decision making. Once we begin with the consumer, we can then work backwards to its impact on advertising and the advertising industry. Ad spend has continued to grow at a healthy clip at about the same pace as the economy worldwide, so things have not changed all that much. Now, clearly, below the surface of this staid, calm picture, there is turbulence. There has been turbulence, in particular, in the transition from the mass era in the 1990s to the much more customized, personalized digital era of the 21st century. And so even though television has continued to blossom, to continue to boom, despite all predictions to the contrary, it has not gone the way of print, for example, or at least not yet. And so this is a fairly good picture until you compare it to digital. And then you realize that the future isn't exactly what it used to be. Digital, the true digital revolution began at the dawn of the century when Yahoo acquired Overture, and then Inktomi, and then Google acquired DoubleClick, and that really set up the battle for the digital consumer. That is what has been playing out for 20 years in various forms. The huge advantage being, of course, that customers could be reached asynchronously, that is, not all at the same time, which television compelled them to do. So consumers could be reached asynchronously, consumers could be reached individually. The segmentation of consumers was far greater, far finer. And at the same time, the same devices that they used to surf to obtain the advertising were also the devices that collected information about their media exposure habits, their purchase habits, their interests, their desires, and their activity. In this decade, we've seen the transition to mobile, and this transition has primarily been driven by the fact that desktops allow you a certain level of targeting, but you're never really sure who's using the desktop or how many people are using the desktop. Mobile allows you to segment down to the level of one, target individual consumers based on their specific behaviors. And that has been the revolution of this decade. That transition happened fairly quickly and is still continuing. And we've gone from, in 2010, at the start of this decade, mobile advertising expenditures of approximately zero to mobile expenditures of over $50 billion. And that transition will continue. But now, add to that mix AI. And AI changes a huge number of things. And I'll try and distill those things down to two simple headings, if you will. What really does AI change? And before we get into that, AI is being accepted, being adopted by consumers even more rapidly than mobile phones. So that transition is likely to occur within 5 to 6 years rather than the 10 years that mobile has taken. And so there's this very rapid transition to AI has huge consequences, not just for marketing, but also starting with consumer behavior, and I'd like to get into that a little bit. The first thing to note is that the true revolution here is AI. It's not voice. Voice is a medium, and it's a medium that does allow you to reach the consumer wherever they are, even when they're driving, even when they're at work, and it allows an engagement with the consumer at a very low transaction cost for the consumer. Fine. But what is truly revolutionary in that interaction is the AI. It's the artificial intelligence. It's the ability to take all of the big data related to the individual consumer's purchase habits over years sometimes and distill it down and make sense of it and use that data to make predictions about future preferences, future choices, and contextual choices. That's what AI does. And that's why it makes so much sense for advertising to move in that direction, but also that's why it is dominant as a solution and will eventually drive out non-AI based advertising. So what happens with AI and the consequences? We could go into a whole bunch of consequences including the sharpening of personalization, the contextualization, making sure that advertising and messages and products and information is presented exactly when, where, and how the consumer wants. Sure, but fundamentally, AI changes two things. One, it automates routine purchases, and that's tremendously important. And then the second is simplifying complexity. And as the market becomes more complex, as purchases become more complex, as phone plans become more complex, it's necessary to have an assistant that is able to help you navigate that complexity by simplifying the choices that are available. And so let's look at these two in a little more detail. Automating of routine purchases. I want you to think about what happens currently in the existing model, which has been around for about almost 100 years. The consumer makes a weekly shopping trip. Before they make that weekly shopping trip, they prepare shopping lists, either from memory or by looking at their cupboards and closets, or by or using an app, or they make the list based on an ongoing list that is made every time something runs out. So, but a list is an aid to shopping, which requires which is used for products that are replenished on a frequent basis, on a regular basis. They're exposed to reminder ads, and those reminder ads allow the consumer or help the consumer put stuff on the list. And often, if you look at these consumer lists, they will include not just the product category name, but they will include the brand name of the items that they want to replenish. Then the consumer goes into the store, drives there. There is some in-store comparison that happens. And this is a picture intended to depict in-store comparison. Then there's occasional impulse purchases. There's loading, you load the cart, you go through the checkout, you load your car, you get home, you take the stuff out and put it into your cupboards and closets. And that's the entire shopping trip. And at each of these steps, marketers have figured out how to influence the decision-making that happens, how to influence the consideration sets that get formed, how to influence the comparisons that take place, how to influence the consumer as they're reaching for the product. The retailer is telling them, no, not the brand, buy the private label, and so on. And so shelf talkers are present in exactly the right place at the right time to make to allow influences on contextual decisions. That process is well understood. It has been around, as I said, for almost 100 years. Advertisers base their strategies and their tactics on an understanding of this process. The consumer behavior that occurs is well known. Often, the repurchase of routine items is indeed automated. Automated in the sense that consumers know that they're going to purchase the brand before they even walk into the store. They simply need to reach for it and put it into their cart. But I also want you to think about the entire cycle and think about the transaction cost that we, marketers, sellers of goods and products, impose on the customer. We get the consumer to have to think about what they want, make a list of what they want, keep tabs on their inventory at home, figure out what's running out and at what rate and what speed, how frequently they purchase stuff, put all of that on a list, go out to the grocery store, drive there, get a shopping cart, put stuff into the shopping cart, possibly comparing promotions, coupons, and advertising in store. And then they go through a checkout process, which is increasingly complex because there's no people there. And then they take the bags, they go to the car, they load up their car, they come home. This is a very high transaction cost environment. And if you can take elements of this and automate them, and if the AI can track, let me just come back. If the AI can track what you purchase, how often you purchase it, when you run out, if the AI can keep tabs on your consumption patterns, there are approximately 300, varying between 200 and 500, but approximately 300 items that every single household consumes on a regular basis. Everything from shampoo to dishwashing detergent, paper products and laundry detergent and deodorants and so on. There's a list of 200 to 500 products that households consume on a very regular basis at a very regular rate. And the AI can initially simply take all of these routine purchases and automate them. And by automating them, what does that mean to automate these purchases? The AI keeps tabs on the inventory, figures out what to order next, figures out how to place that order with an online grocery store. The products arrive, the inventory is updated, and the AI continues to operate. The AI also has access to your calendar. The AI knows that you're going on a business trip next week, and therefore it's not going to order fish for the next grocery run. The groceries are delivered. Now, what has happened in this process of automation? Contextual understanding of what the consumer is really looking for built into the AI. What happens then is that these companies, which are selling these routine purchase products and spend $45 billion collectively every year reminding the consumer what the consumer should be buying, intervening in that purchase process, what happens to those $45 billion? If now it is the AI that is making the decisions, if it's the AI that is tracking the inventory, if it is AI that is doing the price comparisons, if it is the AI that orders the product and has it delivered to the door, if it's the AI that has taken over all of those tasks and automated them, why are we spending $45 billion reminding the consumer to put the brand on the list? That question is a gigantic question worth much more than $45 billion. This is just the top 6 food companies in the world that are doing this. If you start to add it up, there are hundreds of billions of dollars that no longer make sense, that will be spent elsewhere, that will be spent influencing the consumer through the AI algorithms rather than through television advertising or through advertising in general. So ask yourselves what's coming down the pike once the AI starts to figure out what are the industries that are affected first? The industries that are affected first are the top 10 industries that spend money on advertising. Retail, pharmaceuticals, leisure, food, hygiene, and these are all the routine purchases that can be automated easily, quickly by the AI. And the automation of routine purchases means that once the AI has that down, once the AI has understood what to order when, in what quantities and at what price, and is doing the price comparison and so on for you, you no longer have to think about it as a consumer. And if the consumer is not thinking about it, there's no need to advertise to the consumer. The retail revolution will mean that the grocery stores as we know them today may well be obsolete, and that delivery through drones or otherwise will be much more prevalent. In fact, Amazon recently patented drone delivery directly to your trunk, your car trunk, and partnered with OnStar so that your trunk will be open once the drone arrives, products will be dropped into the trunk will close and so on. So automation of purchases can be taken all the way to the delivery phase. What does it mean to a machine to be brand loyal? Those are questions that will start to become important, interesting, and relevant. How do you create brand loyalty? How do you distinguish it from simple routine repurchase? How do you make sure that there is some sort of loyalty to the brand? In fact, a bigger question might even be, do we need brands? Remember that brands were built in order to build consumer trust. Brands were built in order to simplify the purchase for the consumer. If we no longer need to build the trust because the consumer now trusts the AI to make the right purchases and the decisions and choices, then do we really need brands? Or will one brand suffice? Amazon. The second thing that AI will do is to simplify complex purchases. And the simplification of complex purchases basically means understanding the consumer's criteria of purchase. What is it that you're trying to optimize when you purchase an automobile? If your priority is to optimize fuel efficiency or environmental friendliness, then the entire set of automobiles gets arranged differently than if your goal is to maximize roominess or sportiness. And so The AI spends a lot of time, its algorithms are designed, actually it doesn't spend a lot of time. Its algorithms are designed to understand your criteria of purchase, to distill those down, and therefore distill the entire marketing environment down to the 2 or 3 choices that are relevant to you based on your preferences, based on your criteria of purchase. And once the AI can simplify the entire marketing environment. Right now, when you go onto Amazon and you type in phone plan, you get 400 different phone plans, but which ones are relevant for you? How do you sift through those? How do you figure out which ones are the ones that are most relevant to you? The AI will go back and look at your calling patterns and understand which ones will be best served by which plans, and will propose 2 or 3 plans that best fit your past calling patterns, perhaps even adapting them to future events. And when that starts to happen, the AI is the one making the decisions. So why are we advertising to the consumer? For complex purchases, there are at least 5 players in the top 10, among the top 10 advertisers. In other words, this entire list starts to be affected by the automation and the simplification of purchases by the AI. How do you market to the algorithm? If you're not advertising to the consumer, how are you marketing to the algorithm? What does that even mean? And if you want to understand what it means to market to the algorithm, I highly recommend talking to top YouTubers. Top YouTube producers have spent the last 3 to 4 years trying to understand what elements of the YouTube algorithm will drive their YouTube videos to the top 10, to the top 20, and so on. That exercise has proved fascinating. And these top YouTubers have come up with rules of thumb and algorithms of their own, which allow them to play to the algorithm that YouTube uses. And it allows you to also understand the process of what it takes to play the algorithmic game. It allows you to understand what it takes. What is this algorithm, and what should your algorithms be? Because it's basically now your machines talking to the consumer's machines. And if the consumer's telling you, have your machines call my machines, that's what advertising is. It's important for your machines to know what their machines are thinking. The marketing to the algorithm is about understanding the criteria that algorithms are using. What are they trying to maximize? How have they learned these criteria from consumers? What are the consideration sets that they form? How do they go from a consideration or a set of available alternatives of 400 brands down to 4? What are the processes that they're using to filter? How do you redesign products and features to optimize to the algorithm? How do you redirect budgets and data and conduct data analytics? The market can change because the algorithm changes. Recently, this happened with YouTube. YouTube changed its algorithm, tweaked its algorithm, and 3 of the top 10 influencers on YouTube dropped out of the top 10. And they had to re-understand the algorithm in order to keep up. We also know that those algorithms and the platforms that run the AIs are going to be dominated by very few players worldwide. Google and Facebook, sure, but Amazon is one of the fastest growing advertising platforms today, as you well know. What is different about these platforms from existing ways of advertising to the consumer, what is totally different, is that these platforms aren't just media that carry messages to the consumer. These platforms are data collection machines that understand the consumer. These platforms become the primary channel of communication, information search for solutions. They are the platforms on which product comparisons take place. They are the platform where after-sales service is sought they are also the payment platform. They are the platform where media exposure happens, and they are the platform for recommendations and advice. When you roll all of those functions into one platform, that's a very powerful platform that stands between advertisers, brands, and the consumer. And there's very little that these advertisers can do to access the consumer directly. So the power of the platform is set to increase. If today's advertisers are wondering, how did Walmart get so powerful? They're, over the next 5 years, going to find that these platforms are 5 to 10 times more powerful than Walmart. There are two solutions to this. Make TV much more interactive, much more like the internet, and we're seeing this already. And the second is to circumvent the platforms to try and build direct consumer links. There are dozens, there are hundreds of ad tech startups that are trying to do these two things, that are trying to solve these two problems. I work with a couple of them. I'm on the advisory board. One of them is Oona. Oona is making television much more interactive, much more gamified, much more rewarding to watch. And the other one is Tuku, which is designed as a communication platform to allow your product packages, as a branded goods consumer seller, to allow your product packages to become mechanisms for interacting with the consumer, because those product packages contain ways to link to video content, informational content, safety content, usage content, and so on. Simply by tapping your phone on the product package, you're able to access all of that information. But more importantly, that creates a two-way channel of communication between the brand and the seller than the buyer, which would not have been possible if you were relying entirely on Facebook or on Google. We know that AI is here to stay. It's advancing rapidly. And so any strategies that are built today have to be built for the short term, but also built to last. The medium follows the consumer. We've seen this. We've seen how the consumers shift from mass media to digital media to mobile, and now mobile to AI-based media is inevitable. It has taken the world by storm, changed the face of advertising. And this is where the consumer is headed. AI offers such advanced functionality, such huge benefits over existing ways of advertising and existing ways for the consumer to consume and navigate the world, that it is an inevitable next step. And AI builds connections to consumers, not just advertising. And probably the nugget of the implication in this second statement is that you should too. You shouldn't be looking at advertising as a solution. You should be looking at advertising as an element of the solution that allows you to build connections with the consumer. So now, based on this, a question to you might be, over the next 20 or 30 years, will the advertising industry look more like manufacturing has over the last 20 to 30 years, or more like healthcare has over the last 20 to 30 years? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niraj. We're in the spirit of time, we're not going to actually have any questions, but I am going to ask the audience, did anyone recognize the music that Niraj came out on stage to? Anyone? Terminator, well done. Okay, let's give Niraj a really big hand. I know we're all...
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to reality, which they'll no doubt do. I'm particularly excited for this next session. As labelled by Alistair Taylor last year, these are not my words, I'm proud to host two angry British folks here on stage who will be moderated by a nice, polite, calm Canadian and local favourite, Jed Schneiderman. Now let's give a huge hand to Alistair, Stu and Jed, who's in charge of this session. Come on, ladies and gentlemen.
You want us here? Here and here. You're there.
Okay.
Boys, thanks. Thanks some more.
I'm good.
Are the mics working? Hi, everyone. I think the intro was off a little bit. My intention is not to be nice today.
It's not possible.
And I've never been accused of being nice. And secondly, I think we're going to make this more of a debate as opposed to a fireside chat and mix it up a little bit. So we were hoping that we could kill the live stream because there's probably going to be a handful of F-bombs. I expect Alistair to deliver the first few. I'm going to try not to curse. Anyways, let's get into it. Thank you for doing this. So first question. How come consulting firms like McKinsey get paid millions of dollars for engagements and media agencies don't? Why are brands so willing to pay smart companies like BCG, Bain, and McKinsey for large engagements for their thinking, and they won't pay you guys for your work in the same model or in the same vein?
So I'd be interested to know, could you just raise your hand if you're a client?
That's not a lot.
Okay. So, no, listen.
We're done. Thank you.
I'm trying not to swear straight away. So no, listen. The reason I asked that question is because thank you for coming, first and foremost, right? I find it, so I get what Jed's asking about, and I'm totally going to deflect, because for me, the interesting challenge that's going on in our marketplace is that we've got clients focusing a lot of attention in places where they're not spending a lot of money, right? There's not enough clients at this event, because the majority of most of our clients are still spending half of their dollars in television. So to sort of sideways answer your question, I think the reason they're doing that is because they're not paying enough attention to the bigger picture. That would be my first push.
So what is the bigger picture? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, if the job of the CMO is become more precarious, if their job is to both run the business and lead the strategy, but many of them are only there for 18 to 36 months, who owns the strategy? Like, does the strategy follow the media? Does it precede the media? And then the sort of footnote is, how many CMOs in Canada actually control their own strategy outside of banking and retail? So who owns the strategy?
I mean, I would...
You be ready?
Go for it.
It depends what strategy you're talking about, to be honest. And I think that where those consultants have been talking to, we call them clients, client companies, has been at a board level about lots of other things that don't include communications. And those consulting companies have found ways to talk to our clients about things that involve communication. So that's the way that's come in.
Yeah.
Their historical model of charging has been more than we've done. We've talked about it a lot this morning, and we've commoditized our business. We're highly competitive, and consulting firms hold their ground a bit much more on how much they charge.
But as a former mediocre marketer and crappy client, I mean, my biggest line item was my marketing budget. And so if majority of that, because I was a brand manager in the 1920s, went to television and print, the point is that's what as you said, Alistair, that's where I spent my time and my energy. But if my biggest challenge now is that I have to now spend money at Loblaw in order to promote my own product, I now have to worry about Amazon as a third retailer, I actually need help figuring out where the gold is, and so that's what I'm hoping that you'll do.
Well, you've just described it. It's just got way more complicated, which means that agencies are more relevant than ever before. We've always been those people that allow simplification of a very complex ecosystem. And, certain people would come into small areas and be very good in small areas. But actually, you need to look at you just described it. You need to look at the whole ecosystem. You need to look at the balance of where everything's spent and what am I trying to do with my limited resource in an ever-fragmenting market. And I think Alistair's point is another good one, that we concentrate on all the fragmentation and not necessarily sometimes on the bigger buckets that we're spending money.
Okay, so why on judgment do Google and Facebook appear, you can challenge me on this, to get more face time with your clients than probably you do? You can challenge me, I could be wrong. I mean, Procter a number of years ago did 6-month secondments. Procter sent their employees to Google, Google sent their employees to Procter. I'm probably right, but I could be wrong. When was the last time you did a secondment arrangement of that nature with one of your clients?
We did one last year with Molson.
I told you I'd be wrong, so, okay. No, but I'm back to the first question. My judgment would be is that clients probably give disproportionate face time to Google and Facebook. Back to your point about where the spend is.
I'll give you an example, and it's all to do with brand and marketing. We talked about it, I think Reese talked about it earlier, about how good they are at marketing themselves. And, they're big clients of us, so, we like Google and Facebook. But I'll give you an example. Jake Norman left Mindshare to go and work at Facebook. And he was working on Tim Hortons when he was at Mindshare. When he went to Facebook, he went to ask one of his guys that worked on, I think, the CPG division. What are you doing today? He said, I've got a call with the CMO of Tim Hortons. Oh, how often do you have that? Oh, every week. Jake had a monthly call with that CMO when he was at Mindshare. So I think it's, people will take a call from Google and Facebook. It's branding. Everyone knows about it. If someone rings up and I'd love to have a Google business card. Hi, it's Stuart from Google. Can I have a chat? Yeah, cool, Google. I can tell my kids I had a meeting with Google.
But is that in part?
And then I think it's gone a bit further than that. But people are going to take calls from Google and Facebook, and this was the same when I was at a broadcaster side. We've got to bring value to higher up individuals to make sure that we're having those conversations, and we do lots of times. We're just not very good at continuing to do it and telling people we do it.
Okay, so if I bring together 2 points. One, I'm hearing that's an opportunity because in my mind, the reason why the CMO of Tim's is probably talking to a 26-year-old from Google is because that individual's teaching him or her something about digital or advertising or media that they didn't know. So if you have this pan view across all the touch points, you get out of bed in the morning, what are you thinking about these are the things that I need to teach my client, my CMO, whoever the media director is in the client chair? What are the opportunities that you see?
The problem is, Jed, that most of what we need to teach them is the inconvenient truth.
Which is what?
Which is, the highly unpopular idea that maybe digital isn't the solution for everything, right? Is it a great device for connecting lots of different things? Absolutely. You go back to your initial question, I think the people that own the strategy are the CEOs.
Right.
They're the guys who are telling the CMOs they've got 18 months, right? And it's the relationship that exists, as Stuart said, at the C-suite level with those consultancies that are helping them, I don't know, find a better way to buy forks or, there's multitudes of engagements.
But aren't you in a better position to have the conversation with the CEO to say, listen, you're spending more money with me than anyone else.
Agreed.
Let's take $1 million out of that, think about the business, because once we do, I'll be able to iterate and spend on it right now, as opposed to get a PowerPoint deck that I can't execute against because a consulting firm doesn't know.
Yeah, and let's be fair, Google and Facebook have done a really good job of supporting lots of businesses they work with in exactly what you've just described, helping them through some complex situations.
So why is there...
We've not been very good. We've been concentrating on competing with each other, taking down our fees, promising pricing, and thinking that's the way forward. And actually, it's we've missed what we should have been doing for a lot of time, which is helping clients fix their business problems through communication. And we do it a lot, but we're just... We sort of lost our way a little bit while we went through this. We're really scared of Google and Facebook. What are they doing? Someone said earlier on the panel, oh, don't go and speak to my client. Well, if we don't know what they're going to speak to the client about, then shame on us. So I think we're a lot better now. Yeah. But that's where it's come from.
So why is there this shift now where in-housing versus using an agency is an all or nothing thing? So many large corporations have in-house counsel. They still use external legal firms for a whole bunch of different issues. Why is this movement of I'm bringing all of my digital in-house or I'm bringing all of this in-house? Why does it have to be completely binary?
I don't think it is. We've got lots of clients that have pieces of that puzzle that they work seamlessly with our teams across, I guess, the organizational barriers, right? So I think maybe there's some headlines out there to tell that story, but...
Is there any pressure on television? Like, is there any pressure from clients to do more in-house vis-a-vis TV as a distinct medium, the way search and social have been brought in or anything like that?
We haven't seen it on television.
No.
There's probably one client that we've seen do their own television.
Okay. So,
But again, as they described earlier, the processes behind buying traditional media are harder. That being said, the process behind buying digital media sometimes surprises people when they in-house it. You know, we've had lots of occasions where people have in-housed, and suddenly they're like, oh Christ, didn't realise I had to do that and that and that. So lots of times, I'm sure it's the same at your shop.
Yeah.
We're helping people and helping them get into clean human supply. That's what we were doing. We were looking after the supply chain for them. We were looking after the invoicing. We were looking after the trafficking. All the things that
Taking the sales rep calls.
It's very easy on I'm just going to do digital because it's, you know what it is, it's just pressing a few buttons. It's not.
No.
Programmatic is hard work. It needs a lot of plumbing.
So have you had clients that have brought in-house and then shut down in-house operations and come back to you?
Yep.
To varying degrees, yes.
Okay. So what does a conversation look like when someone mentions to you we're considering bringing something in-house? Other than the obvious like tactical benefits of billing is complicated and all that other stuff. Like back to the opportunity of agencies, if you've got this sort of panoramic view of either what the consumer does or the media landscape or whatnot, like what are some of the things, what are some of the discussion points that you have either with these clients or inside your own organization, which I want to get to in a second, which is what do the future of the jobs look like within your organizations in order to keep pace with what's going on? So the first is, like, what are some of the...
I'm glad you went back to what the question was because I was getting lost.
Yeah, I tend to do that. What do some of the, like if you could help people in the crowd, like what are some of the conversations that you have initially when someone says, I want to bring this in-house, or what are some of the questions you ask them?
I mean, listen, for me, it's making sure they understand the scale of the undertaking. Like,
Yeah.
I know, Stuart, and you asked us not to labor that point, right?
Yeah.
But that is a massive undertaking. If it's a large-scale organization, it's generally about building out a roadmap that helps them understand how you can test the process and let it roll out. Like, fundamentally, this is your investment to make as a client. I can't stop you. I won't stop you. I will give you advice. I will encourage you. I will hopefully point out as many pitfalls as I can, but, you know, and try and safeguard you from it failing. That's absolutely what a business partner should do. But sometimes it ends up stalling, right? Slowing. We've got a situation right now where one of our clients is planning on in-housing some of their efforts, and their intent is to hire absolutely no more staff. So I can't tell you how many times I've told them this is a massive revenue risk for you. Mm-hmm. You are taking a huge gamble here. But if you want to do it, we'll try and support you through it.
So what do the future of jobs look like in your companies as people have to deal now with different stakeholders internally, or they, at the highest level, even though they're not doing it day to day, they're fending off Accenture and Bain and all these others who are nipping and coming in and talking directly to the CEO, where maybe you're talking to the CMO, but odds are you're probably talking to the CMO. So what do you have to do internally? Everything from training your own organization to, I don't know, bringing different tools to the table for your clients. What are you doing different internally in order to justify and explain that the job of your staff today is wildly more complicated than it was 20 or 30 years ago?
I think you just answered your own question. But it's something we should all have been doing anyway, which is training our staff, keeping them updated, making sure we're on top of all the changes that are happening in the industry. Are we hiring slightly different people? Probably a little bit more numerical, but we've got to keep the creative side, because you can take all the insight you want out of data, but you still got to have a good idea. So it'll change, but not as much as people think. But yeah, you have to hire some different people. I mean, everyone's got data scientists in media agencies now. We didn't have those before.
So is the change that we're experiencing now any greater than what we saw 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or is this just another sort of
I think
part of
it's
the
another,
cycle?
the bigger, there's going to be more macro changes around flexibility in the work environment. Those are not exclusive to marketing, media, advertising, whatever. That to me is going to be the main change. Like, yes, the skills that people have are going to have to evolve, to Stuart's point. But honestly, in this, the technology revolution, the equivalent of the industrial revolution that's happening right now in our work lives, every day we will have an exponential curve ahead of us, and that's okay, right? As long as you find people with that mindset, then they will continue to grow and adapt and change with the organization as the needs grow, change, and adapt.
So what kind of conversations are you having with clients? So I remember sitting down once with the CMO saying that they were part of the problem because they were asking their clients, i.e. they were asking agencies to do a lot more for a lot less. We even heard it on the agency versus broadcaster panel of, talking about CPMs going from $1 down to 0.75, knowing full well that the cost of producing a show or a hockey game doesn't go down by 25%. So at what point do you say to a client, like, you're fired, or you say, I'm not pitching on this piece of business? Like, what are you doing to move the market so as to kind of point out some of these realities, not at the tactical level, which is, do you in-house or not? What are some of the bigger things that you're doing to push back on clients or lead client thinking?
I'm going to sort of deflect from answering the question a little bit. I mean, we do have discussions internally, and we do refuse to pitch for stuff. Yeah. We've done that both globally, and some of the pricing that we've walked away from, I've seen from Canada, is extraordinary. And we do some locally that we just don't want to work with that kind of partner. But I think the key word is partnership. Ever since I've been in Canada, we have this strange hierarchical sort of view of the world, and it's changing, but really slowly, that the client is this amazing demigod. The agency is the person that gets kicked around by the demigod, and then we call them vendors, which I think is insulting. Yeah. Our supplier partners just have to do anything that either of those one or two people say. And actually it's much more horizontal, and we should be working with our clients as business partners, trying to help them grow their businesses. Because we're not just servants, and we just don't do things for free, because I'm responsible for 800 people paying their mortgage, which means I have to make some money in order to pay them.
So does the model need to change?
Yeah, and those models are changing. Like, this is never an evolving thing. It's not a linear, oh my God, it's terrible now. These models are changing. But we have to work in partnership, and in partnership, and in any partnership, you hold each other to account, and you kind of say, well, yeah, you want me to do that, but if I do that, either you pay me more, or I can't do that, because I just don't have the people. And we've been historically really bad at saying yes to everything, and we're all to blame. Clients have asked for much and expecting a yes, and get cross when we don't say yes, so we say yes. And then we don't deliver it because we haven't got the resource to deliver it. And we've not had the honest partnership conversation at the start to say, these are the scope. This is the scope, and this is what we're going to deliver. And if you want extras here and here and here, then I'm going to have to find extra resource, and you're going to have to pay for it. Or you can find someone else to do it. But we need to have those honest partnership conversations, and we do have that with a lot of our clients.
Do you have a last comment before we wrap?
All I was going to add was, if I had $1 for every time I said no one owns the word no in any agency I've worked at, I'd be very wealthy. To Stuart's point, it is very much a yes culture, and we need to find a way of being very clear on what we are and not
But don't you think that message also has to go all the way to the bottom? Because the reality is the turnover at the junior level is so bloody high that no one knows anyone anymore.
Well, and we have to empower people to sort of say, okay, you want that. What's the actual thing you want?
Right.
Because Lots of times, and everyone in the room will get this every day in their lives. Someone will say, I want that. And you spin your wheels for days and days and days trying to deliver exactly that. And it's not quite what they want. Because we've not said, okay, well, what are you trying to fix?
Why?
Why? Like, and we can work out together what that fix is. We do it all the time because it's really easy just to say, yeah, I'll go and do that.
Cost per give a shit.
But it's actually about being curious.
I had to get in one
and
swear
I
word.
think
Sorry.
good client relationships and good relationship with supplier partners are all about asking the right questions, having a relationship so you can kind of go, okay, I get what you're asking. What are you trying to achieve to do that? Because I might have a different way of doing it, which doesn't hurt you or me.
But that probably implies that you're going to have to say no to certain requests and say no to certain clients, because a zero-fee deal puts you behind the 8 ball at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Right? We're out of time. I'm looking around for a microphone. Is there like a Q&A thing at this point? Do we have time for a couple questions? Any questions? That was either a good sign or a really bad sign. So thank you very much, and we'll
bombed,
clear
we
out.
bombed.
I bombed, yeah.
No,
And,
we bombed.
And we'll make way for the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, fellas. And I think we should give a big round of applause for Jed for having to chair those two. He did a marvellous job. Well done, Jed. Thank you, mate. Right. David Phillips is between you and filling your stomachs, and it's a real pleasure to have him chair. He's been a brilliant moderator for us in other events as well that we've hosted around the world. So it's my pleasure to invite David Phillips, who's CEO of Enlogic, and his panel to cap off what has been the most entertaining session. Let's give them a round of applause as they come on stage.
Hello everyone. So I'm David. That was Everything Now for the fake hipsters, because everything's now. I should have had Everything AI, but sadly that was unavailable. So I'm here mainly because I have a British accent, and it appears that's the main qualification for speaking today. So I have, I'm not going to be grumpy and I'm not going to swear, so other than that I'm very British. So we've heard a lot today about new things, about new technology, new partnerships, new ways of thinking about the future. So I want to spend some time with this fantastic panel here talking about sort of a very good but basic question, which is so what? And specifically, what does that mean, so what, when it comes to the business of building brands? So we are sadly missing one panelist, Trisha, who couldn't make it due to a last-minute family emergency. But we have a very chatty panel I've just witnessed. So I think we're going to be fine. And I'll introduce from my left to your right, Jan Kessel, President and CEO of Environics Analytics. Dave Morgan, CEO and founder of Simon Media. Chris Pizzurro, VP Global Sales and Canoe. And Guy Yuan, Director of Global Media and Marketing Science, Scotiabank. So welcome all, and thank you. So I'm going to start with a sort of level-setting question. So the title of this session is, do the old rules still apply? And I wanted to get your thoughts on what the old rules are. Do we all agree on what they are to begin with? And then we can explore what we think they may be, how they think we may be changing, and why. So what do we think the old rules are? Jan, do you want to start?
Well, for me, the rules are, evidence-driven decision-making. Let's use information that we have about consumers and what they do and why they do it in order to reach them and connect with them. And we've all been, well, not all of you, but I've been doing it for decades, and many of you have too. And I think the old rules do apply, but the old rules need to apply in a new environment. And that's really where the challenge is for brands and for agencies and for buyers.
So, Chris, if I could just ask you the same question, what you think the old rules are, and then we'll get into what we think the new environment may be. What do you think the old rules are that we are questioning?
I think for television, old rule is scale. And that remains what I believe brands, agencies are always looking for when a place to invest dollars is it needs to be worth it for them. So I think as we move into some new ways of doing things in television, that the test, trial, learn stages are all fantastic, but the business does need to get to scale in order for it to make complete sense to brands. So I think that's an old rule that absolutely applies.
So further to that, Dave, do you think there are any old rules that don't apply?
Yeah, well, I mean, we heard this on the session earlier with the media owners and the buyers. The old rules of TV were you get what you get and you don't get upset. Anyone that's had children in nursery school know that when you pick up the color of your hula hoop. And I think what we heard from the buyers and what we're hearing is that that won't apply. I have more choices now, and I want better measurement, more targeting. I want more control over my media. I want flexibility to use it. And now there's choices, and I think that's what the statistics that we saw about this massive over-rotation out of linear TV into digital isn't because digital is working that well. It's at least digital is giving a sense of control and flexibility, which TV is not.
I agree. It's that sense of control that really has perpetuated a lot of our move to digital.
So since you are the person who spends money, or close to the people who spend money,
all right.
and we love you the most, what's your take on this? So are you looking at old rules differently? And if so, what's made you question them?
Well, I agree with Jan that those old rules you still need that mass scale, but I don't necessarily need it on television. I can get it elsewhere. And I have more control. So the old rule of I need to get scale for awareness, yeah, that's people needing to know what your brand is. That's a pretty fundamental truth, right? You can argue with me with that or not, but I think there are other tools and other channels that you can do that on now.
So are we talking predominantly about sort of behavior changing or form factors changing? So Dave, you mentioned essentially that sort of the way that TV should be reported, the way we should view TV should change. But do you think there are fundamental changes into the consumer behavior behind that, or is it just a form factor?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons that television's been vulnerable is we've seen significant consumer behavior changes in consuming content at significant scale for a lot of marketers in social, in streaming video on demand, though a limited amount still is ad supported, in video on demand from the operators. So that's helped change it, but it hasn't changed the pricing and packaging and delivery and measurement of TV. And we heard earlier, I want to get this line exactly right, was not having weekly viewing posts and only having season average program ratings is essentially nonsense. And I think that we can talk about all the greatest targeting in the world, but if you actually can't change your economic transaction for 14 weeks and know about it, like those kinds of things are easy behavior changes that haven't happened.
Jan, so a lot what your company focuses on is consumer insights and segmentation, and forget me if I'm reducing that to something too simplistic, but you spend a lot of time understanding the marketplace and consumers. Do you see significant shifts in their behavior? So we will spend some more time talking about essentially the trading behavior and how TV can be bought and sold, but do you see significant changes in consumer behavior that marketers need to pay real attention to?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think in the last 10, 15 years, the consumer has taken control of how they want to be marketed to. It used to be coming in the other direction. And so they choose the media of preference. They can respond to certain messages. But the other side of the coin is we know a lot, and there's no general trends anymore in consumer behavior. The devil's in the detail. The advertiser has to understand how to get the right message to the right segment at the right time using the right medium. And there's lots of data to do that. The challenge, honestly, has been the ability for us as an industry to execute against that in the buy, to combine the kind of demographic and consumer insight and lifestyle media preference data that we can get from our kind of data and the data that people have. How can you combine that and create a custom audience that's going to go across the omni-channel, not just for TV and not for digital, and how can you get it into software that allows you to actually do a TV buy? And that's where, with all that change that's out there in how consumers can function, our industry's having to move to how can we actually deliver that so we can buy against that promise.
So, Chris, I'd imagine that's an area you've spent some time. What's your take on essentially what consumer behavior is changing that marketers have to react to?
Well, I can do, for those of you who don't know, we're 37 million households in the US across pay TV operators, Comcast, Cox, and Charter. So you're watching an on-demand program and an ad goes in there that's coming through the ecosystem. So I think the first thing we've seen in terms of consumer behavior is one of those things, if you build it, they will come scenario. There was, once the programmer started putting a whole bunch of content up on the VOD service, the consumers, found it with not that much marketing. And now, you come into the Canadian market with things like the new systems, the Comcast X1 system now being adopted by different operators here. As that goes in, you'll see those VOD views rise. So I think it goes back to sort of the control of the consumer. Same programming with a little bit lighter ad load, which is also respecting the consumer's time. So I think it's an incremental step that we've done, right? It's not some gigantic leap to all sorts of targeting, but it is at scale. It's respecting the consumer in terms of ad load, and it's giving them the programs they want when they want to watch them. So as an incremental step of kind of TV's here and digital's here, things that we built in between, I think it's resonating with consumers, and it's resonating with a bunch of brands, is that we've built a $1 billion plus marketplace in the US on those terms.
Okay, so I think that there are, again, changes in sort of like how we're trading, how we're making content available to consumers. I want to take it almost like a more fundamental step back and maybe try and ignite some of the emotions that I saw backstage and talking about whether AI is going to disrupt everything or not. At the end of it, brands, there's this understanding built on sort of, when Efron and Binet&Field and that about how consumers learn about brands and how they make their preferences and whatever. Do we feel those things have changed? That the way that we mentally process and build up brands and make decisions, do you see changes in sort of how we operate as beings in the marketplace? You see what I'm trying to get at, Dave?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, if you go back 30 years, 40 years, you had a number of limitations that you can know on a brand. You had a number of sort of stock keeping units that were available in any store, and we didn't have big box stores then. You had much smaller stores and smaller shops. You had a limited amount of media distribution, almost all of which were monopolies in most of the world, whether print or one or two newspapers in a town and radio, and with limited number of positions for ads there. And you had manufacturing distribution constrained businesses that had to be really big to get the distribution. So you had a limited number of brands, you paid up to get there, and you didn't have much choice. And I grew up with 3 brands of peanut butter, Jif, Skippy, and Peter Pan. You go into a Whole Foods store today, or a large, a large grocery store, you're going to see 18, 20 brands. You go on to Amazon, you're going to see 180 or 280 brands. So absolutely, there's being an overwhelming amount of choice now.
And in terms of how consumers make those preferences and in terms of how they sort of think about the brands, do you see a change in the world you're in?
I mean, yeah, definitely. I think we're fighting in a world where we're not just competing against the other big 5 brands, banks. We're competing against all those little FIs like the Wealthsimples and those of the world, right? And so,
those guys are mean to you too.
They're very mean to us. I won't say what they did, but they're but also they're making a big splash and they're making their brands known too. So we need to compete within a wider competitive set.
So we've got this proliferation of choice for consumers, proliferation of different ways to reach them. How do you, and I'm going to repeat the question to you, given that you're one who often spends money on this, I would imagine. How do you pick the right bet? Because it's easy to go, everything's going to become AI, and I think there's a certain level of skepticism on this stage about whether that's going to be the case. But there may be something there. So how do you balance essentially new things without sort of going in on something that passes, but also missing a trend? How do you make those decisions?
I mean, it's an art and a science, right? So the science behind it is the AI and the things that we can look at that and get the data and the attribution and all those kind of things, but there's an art to it too that I think sometimes we forget, and so I think we've got to look at both in order to make sure that we're delivering on the goals that we've set for us. Otherwise, I think it becomes all automated, and truth be told, right, we're all humans and we all have that kind of creative need, and so I'm not sure that we can only focus on AI when people have choice and we have free will, and in the end we can override AI. So
are you saying the revolution starts here? Is that basically what you're trying to...
Sure.
Okay, good. Jan?
But I think it's a big culture issue as well. We represent different parts of the industry here. We have the advertisers, we have the media buyers, we have the agencies. We have a hard enough time in Canada, given our history, particularly around TV targeting. We have a hard enough time just getting organizations to work together to go from the short-term solution of, I have this amount of money and what I'm going to do. So I think it'd be a Luddite to say AI isn't the issue, but I don't think it's the front and center issue for today. The issue today is, how do we get the publishers and the broadcasters and the agencies and the analysts to work together around the ability to execute against the best custom audience? And whether part of that definition of custom audience is coming from AI or not, it seems to be a different question. We're going to get there, but the AI isn't going to create the different message and the different creative. They may be able to say the next best offer, but we have, as an industry, have to create that culture of collaboration. And I was saying backstage, for me, because I'm not a TV person, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here 2 years in a row, but I have seen in the past year, through the work that we've done with Rogers and Chorus that they talked about, and with Group M and with some of the other digital, the effort now to create technology that can enable you to actually execute against a strategy. I know people get frustrated, but I think in Canada we're actually starting to move forward. But if we out there always chasing the next best thing, then the march towards getting that 20% custom audience targeting that the panel was talking about this morning will be too fragmented. So to me, we need to focus on what we can do now to make a difference, how we can prove it out, how we can measure it, how we can execute. And just going off and chasing the next technology holy grail, I don't think is going to get us there, considering the progress we're making.
So this sort of relates a little bit to what I was trying to get at, which is, how do we balance the means and the end? So there's different means that we can take to measure what we're doing, to take messages to market. How do we effectively balance that with making sure that the strategy is right, that we're still spending the appropriate amount of money on branding versus activation, et cetera, et cetera? And Dave, do you see changes in those strategies, or are those strategies the same as they used to be? Should they be changing?
Yeah, I think the old rules were you set your strategies relative to your legacy market competitors and relative share, and what you saw coming from research that would come in on an annual basis or quarterly basis afterwards, and reset your budget for the next year. I think that, and that was the whole industry operated off of generally the same kind of numbers, because they operate through the same distribution channels, the same media channels. I think a lot of the emerging brands that we have today, they're not operating by those rules. They're attacking markets. They're not using distribution and sales channels. They're going directly to consumer. They're capitalized in a way that they can run off of a customer acquisition cost, and they can run off of a lifetime value that gives them maybe 20x the marketing media leverage as someone like an existing legacy company. Like, what is Stash versus Scotia in being able to attack? And so they're just going to, and they also don't have to support a big legacy customer base and a bunch of vendors and a bunch of suppliers. They can just attack. So I think that's changing the mix a lot, and it's now making people react to it, sometimes a bit later. But I thought it was really interesting. I think it was the Amobi slide earlier that showed the relative way that video viewing, advertising, delivery is being counted. If you look from impression for social media to Facebook to TV, where it's a total flip. And these aggressive, attacking, disrupting companies, they understand the differences in that. They understand, in many cases, the TV's underpriced, and they're going to start actually moving this market because they're going to come in and take action.
The guy you did that as someone who works at, I think, what could be called a legacy
Sure,
industry. that's
180 some odd years old. We're pretty legacy.
embracing its legacy.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
So are you seeing sort of from the new disruptors, from the Wealthsimples or whatever, sort of new rules being applied that you're like, oh, actually we can learn from that and we can borrow that or steal from that? And if so, what kind of new rules are you
I
seeing?
think they're borrowing from us, aren't they? From what we did before, what we've done before, some of the tactics we've done. There are definitely a lot of the, and here's the thing, right? It's not just the Wealthsimples, it's the Apples and the who are our disruptors. They're on television. They're on all these channels that we were historically on. And so I think they're actually borrowing from us. But I think we need to take a page out of our own book and look at, how we're targeting and how we're finding our audiences in ways that are different than we've kind of moved into this like CPA-driven world, right? And this like acquisition. Our goals are all based on, how many widgets we can sell. And until we move away from that and back into a world where we're looking at how do you grow a brand, I think it's a little bit difficult for us to move forward. So I think our competitors are doing what we did, and we need to get back to a place where we're looking at that as well.
So it's sort of a case that you maybe applied new rules and they actually rediscovered the old ones.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the old rules that we need to revert to, that we've maybe got away from, or maybe larger clients have got away from that we need to rediscover? Chris, any thoughts, or Yao, Guy, any thoughts?
I think there's this blend of what I can speak to is just why have we seen so much growth in brands, agencies putting money in AVOD in the States, right? So like why? Part of it is, like we said, it's the scale, it's the flexibility, but also it is the reactive nature of it, where you can change. It's called dynamic ad insertion, so take advantage of it. We've had clients who just stop that campaign right now, or swap out this creative. And so it's that sort of flexibility on the buy side. And part of that comes because the data is actually flowing back up into Freewheel or Google Ad Manager digital systems that do give the impressions so that those agencies can actually react and make changes dynamically. So it's not just the ads going in, it is actually this cycle of I'm getting the data, it's feeding back in, I can make a business decision that's therefore beneficial to the brand and how I'm spending their money.
So something that Guy touched on, which is really interesting, was like you said something like we ended up being too dominated by like a CPA-driven approach. In other words, possibly the data led us off away from brand building towards activation a bit too heavily, whatever. So, and yet we can also see now we're getting more data available on television in sort of time frames that people are now used to. How do we avoid falling into that same trap of basically mistaking numbers for a holistic understanding of stuff? If we need to get back to an old rule of like, we need to let people know what we're doing, Dave?
Yeah, I think if I looked at a function that seems to have really fallen off the table, it's media planning. And I think that as we've gone more omni-channel, it's been harder and harder to try to have omni-channel planning when we have some media that are purchased on a millisecond and some media are purchased a year in advance. And I think, if I had to say old rules, it would be reach, frequency, and relevance. And you can always add in recency. I would go back and get Erwin Efron's book that was published more than 30 years ago, Media Planning, the late, great Erwin Efron. And if people would just follow that to the T, and apply it both digitally and to TV, everybody's media effectiveness would go up 20%.
Literally go get Erwin's, but if there should be a spike on Erwin Efron.
But I think you have to even go further upstream and go more to the consumer insight, and then take consumer insight to media planning. But the challenge is you have to actually be able to execute against that plan, and that's where we sometimes fall down. So, the previous group were talking about the McKinseys and Bains of the world, but there is a lower level strategic customer insight to execution gap that the McKinseys and the Bains aren't filling either, because they're too much at the high level. So organizations need to have a strategy to understand consumers, turn it into a media plan, and then be able to execute against it. And it's not happening. There's a lot of focus on the execution, the fragmented execution. in individual media, but not the overall plan of how much, you're not going to just buy the best media and the right media. You're going to spend against the potential for many different groups, and you need insight to do that. And the advertiser and the brand people have to go back to understanding the insight. And it's not like once a year market research. It's mining your own data all the time to understand what the media plan should be, and then you need to be able to buy against the plan without having to translate it from a PowerPoint.
Okay, yeah, you seem like you had some thoughts.
So I understand this whole need for customer segmentation, and to me that makes a lot of sense, but what worries me is, and I don't know if any of you guys have heard of this, but zero-party data and how that could potentially negate any customer segmentation, because it's just about, I am the customer, I hold my own data, and so what does consumer segmentation, what's that need for it anymore if the customer owns their own data?
Well, I also think that follows that point, because you have a shopping list for books. I would be reading Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow. And I think that one of the challenges...
This is like Oprah.
Book club.
But these are some old things and some modifications. And what Byron Sharp says is that sort of nothing beats reach. So he's with Efron there, but he basically says that if you only focus on your existing customer and you're only using your data to talk to customers and try to gain loyalty, which ultimately price matters there, you're going to lose the ability to grow. And I think this is one of the things, to your point, the digital companies have taken that rule out of the digital playbook, and they're like, yeah, let's use TV and grow. Let's use brand TV, top of the funnel TV and grow.
Well, I think that's when you go back to what you're saying, just back to basic media planning, Dave, right? Television does have the ability now, not fully there yet, but to actually have upper funnel, middle funnel, and lower funnel, and all in the media planning and come to you, right? Aspects of that are still in the works, but that's where we're at. One other thing you mentioned, I go back to, Dave, your question on what's been lost. You mentioned frequency. And you hear plenty of knock against OTT platforms and CTV and all, and frequencies just through the roof, right? That does not have to be. I mean, there absolutely is reach and frequency curves that have been true since the dawn of time, and they're not being adhered to on the digital side. They're not being adhered to on the OTT side. There's technically no reason why that shouldn't be. And when we talk about advantages of TV, old school rules against new school playbooks, we absolutely should be playing to a strength of that we understand controlling frequency, and that we can execute on that, because it's actually something extremely simple to execute on, but that seems to have gotten lost.
So it seems in some ways that maybe data as represented by the Paul Mistrodden CPA led us away from some old rules that we should have maybe not been led away from in terms of brand fame and reaching new customers and that kind of stuff. And data could potentially lead us back in the form of allowing that data to be made accessible in the plan, in the buy, through the platform, et cetera, What elements of consumer behavior and maybe of sort of marketing in particular are least well served in data? So we had a chat earlier about it's fun to talk about AI in terms of a channel, but we don't really talk about, well, what's the creative going to be? What's the impact of that creative and how do we capture that? So what elements of consumer behavior when it comes to the old rules of building brand fame and consideration, that kind of stuff, are least well served right now, and which ones do you think we should tackle?
I would say right off the bat, state of mind. We have this idea that once you drop someone into a segment, that they live in this segment and that's the person. And I think one of the things that's amazing about media and media advertising, particularly context-rich, is that context both reflects the state of mind of the person that's going in, and it influences the state of mind and the receptivity to advertising. And I was one of the first to do audience-based targeting online in the 90s, but I would also be the first to say that context matters, and we need to get a much better understanding of how to conform the creative and the media plan to the context of where it's delivered and the state of mind of the person, assuming that can indicate it. And that's where I don't think we've yet seen very good work yet on the data side.
Well, Guy, how do you sort of make sure you retain the consumer in the data?
I guess the consumer is someone who we have to look at as a holistic person and not necessarily just that one segment, and not just capture them in that one segment. It's understanding someone's whole life and their life moments for us that make a difference. And it's very hard not to get trapped in that data minefield where you're just, segmenting and segmenting until you've got an audience of one. And so it's balancing that need to make sure that you've got something that you can wrap your hands around and say this is who we're trying to target, but not but speak to them in a way that is, and going back to what you're talking about, the creative is relevant to them and that relevancy.
But I mean, data is not just about segmentation. It's about untapped potential. It's about reach. It's to help understand the consumer across multiple channels. And so we're looking for ways to use as much data about the individual and their behavior in the moment, but also put it in the context of, which things have opportunity and how to help there's no such thing as we know as a digital consumer. Some people are digital for one thing and going to go in a store for another. And so how do we use the data both about the whole population as well as much individual data as you can have about that consumer in the moment to get that experience optimized? If we could truly use all of the individual data to get the right message to that one individual, but nobody's there yet. So I think the idea that consumers are going to control their data and we're not going to have it, that's almost like AI. Right now, there are lots of data that organizations have about their own customers that can be integrated with the data about the media usage and the measurement from a wide variety of tools that aren't even being integrated yet. We're not in danger of segmenting people to death. We're in danger of still not understanding custom audiences and maximizing the information that we have in order to really reach people effectively.
Listen, the holy grail for me is being able to target the same person across all of their entire life and not just digital in a couple of places, in kind of like at a home or something. I want to be able to talk to my customer in a holistic way through their purchase cycle, but nobody has that yet, and that's tough.
So one thing that struck me in recent sort of conferences is there's a lot of kind of acknowledgement of what we should be doing, and oftentimes the should be is again rediscovering old rules and making sure we're following brand versus activation guidelines, and then you see sort of ad spend reports, and there seems to be a disconnect. So there seems to be a disconnect between we all love Burnett and Field and we all love Byron Sharp, and everyone's like we should totally be doing that, and then you don't see that turn up in spend. So why is there a disconnect between those two things, and what can we do to solve? Maybe what could broadcasters do to help solve that?
Do you want to know what the honest truth is?
I want to lie. Yes, please, honest truth.
Our goals as the money spenders, our goals are based on acquisitions. And so if the entire system of how we are bonused and work is based on I sell a widget, I'm gonna push for my 40% acquisition, and who cares about branding? Who cares about that?
So would it be helpful if, for example, the broadcasters made the case about why that's a poor KPI?
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think, we as an industry have to actually work against the bright, shiny object and recognize that it naturally is going to sway things. Because, I'm a digital person who went to TV for the last 7 or 8 years, 10 years, and people are like, linear TV's dead. And I'm like, they're like, everyone's going streaming. And I'm like, well, excuse me, but 35% of Americans do not have fixed broadband at home. That means 103, 104 million people cannot get a streaming service. And that number's up over the last 3 years. And so when you start looking at data and you start trying to understand and you become an empiricist and look at it, and then I think add the longitudinal pieces, because I think one of the reasons the direct-to-consumer companies are doing well, their investors know they're going to die. They know that 9 of 10 will die, but they're investing on long cycles to win long term, and they're looking at customer lifetime value and where they're going to win, and that's why some of these digital companies have shifted into heavy upper funnel spend. And so I think it's being empirical and looking long term, and then purposefully working to push out the bright shiny object and question it more.
Making sure the incentives in the systems
Yeah.
are aligned so that you get rewarded for doing the right thing, not for the wrong thing.
Versus that.
What I want to open up some time for questions. So start thinking about ways in which you can embarrass yourself by asking a really bad question. That was a joke. Good. That's kind of how all my jokes go, even with my children. We've reached that stage where they ask me if that was a joke, which is always good. Is there one thing about the future going forward, and again, we've heard lots about new things, one thing that sort of genuinely terrifies you and one thing that genuinely excites you? Chris, why don't you start?
I think the thing I'd fear is that the fickleness of the consumer. When we all grew up in TV and you turn on the TV and it works within a millisecond and an ad seamlessly goes in and out of a program. Now we're quickly in a world where someone downloads an app. If it doesn't work in 2 seconds, they scrap that and move on to the next one. Someone mentioned earlier today how they'll binge, subscribe to a service and binge watch and then unsubscribe to the service and then subscribe on to the next one, right? So I think there's just almost that consumer immediacy. So you've taken sort of, you have choices, but it's like, no, now I want it now. I think of the example, I think it's Jim Gaffigan or some comedian just laughs how he's, a guy's on an airplane and his Wi-Fi's not working and he's just like complaining. And he's like, you just got on the plane, right? You're in 30,000 feet in a chair. Your expectations are a little high. So I think that high expectation of the consumer sort of scares me. Being a technologist, that we work day in and day out to make sure there's no latency in the system, that ads get to there when they should, that campaigns are delivering, that the VOD platform is the best thing that can be for that consumer. But I fear that it's never going to be good enough. That we always got to keep striving beyond perfection because that expectation level is just being set beyond normal.
Well, let's get a bit more positive. Jen, what excites you? What one thing excites you going forward?
I think of it narrowly from sort of our industry. I'm really excited about what we're doing together in Canada. I know people say, oh, it's too slow and it's not really happening for TV, but I think what we saw this morning, the dialogue with the publishers and the agencies and how we're really starting. Canada's, when we hear the Brits, we hear they always seem to be out there in front in TV and in TV targeting. I mean, maybe they just sound good, I don't know.
It's mainly sounding good.
But I feel like we're making some progress and I'm really excited about the work that's been done in the past year. So I hope we don't make it too complicated or strive too much for perfection, that we can't keep moving forward, because I think we're finally breaking down some silos and moving forward.
Dave, what thing either terrifies or excites you?
Well, I entered the media industry in the early 1990 in the newspaper industry. So
The what? A what?
exactly. and the newspaper industry understood fully what was coming. I mean, I was working in new media. We were all coming to conferences like this in 1993, 94, 95, and the companies did not change according to what was structurally happening and was certain. They were way too in love with their products, not their customers' problems. They loved to go watch Does anyone here know what a flying paster is? Thank God. Anyway, they would go to a conference and say, it's a flying paster, like going to be demoed. That's the thing that actually spins the paper out of the wheel when it runs out, and it does it at like 90 miles an hour and sticks a new roll on. And they were so in love with that. And I hear that from TV companies sometimes. And so what scares me is how much TV people like to be in love with their own product, not their customers' problems. What excites me is that TV hasn't lost, which is why the digital companies are coming to TV. There was every single reason to lose it, and a lot of the large digital companies have assumed they were going to take away the TV audience, and they haven't. And this is still massive ad-supported media that informs and entertains and excites people, and it's dramatically under-optimized, so it has a lot of room yet. So that really excites me, because there's still time and there's years to solve it, and it's an amazing platform.
Nice. And I want to leave the last word of this to the person, as you said, the money person.
Okay, so what excites me, what Jan's doing, that kind of omni-channel targeting with frequency capping. And what scares me is zero-party data and losing absolutely everything. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Any questions from the audience?
One back
In
there.
the back.
Spencer.
Hi, that was an awesome panel. My question is for Guy. I was a little bit surprised to hear you say that you don't think branding matters. When I think of Scotiabank, I think of one really simple phrase, which is "you're richer than you think." And I guess my question for you is, do you think that that association plays a role when you're doing performance-based marketing, and why or why not?
I 100% think branding matters. And I'll give you an example of why it matters. In one of our markets in Latin America, we have zero brand awareness, and the CPA there is through the roof. So 100% branding matters. Sorry if I gave you that impression. And a huge part of my role is making sure that our brand is in a safe place, in the right context. So no, I absolutely agree. Branding does matter.
Great. I think that's it. Thank you very much for my panel. That's fantastic. Thanks a lot.